I'm going to talk about another angle on this subject of human-machine fusion. Essentially, think of what happens when we add AI and brain interfaces to the story. I'm talking about today's AI, not the future AI. I'm going to unpack this a little bit. So what is AI? Well, artificial intelligence, we know what that is, AI. But BCI is brain-computer interface. And today, there's actually an intersection of these two in the topic of augmentation. So let's talk about human augmentation in the sense, well, remember the Iron Man series, the guy who invented all the cool kit for that. Also, he's the one who would surround himself with an exoskeleton. It's this sort of, fantasy body. He also invented an AI companion named Jarvis to help him drive all that machinery. And in a sense, that's the kind of a way in which AI is already an augmentation, in which then the cognitive load and the cognitive actions of even operating other technology is taken over by an AI system. Well, this isn't just science fiction. That AI is involved in the augmentation of humans in some fundamental ways right now. One of the companies I'm working with is building a kind of an augmentation for people who have a limitation in their ability to speak. You might have a neurodegenerative disease like ALS, or you might have a condition from birth like cerebral palsy, which makes it hard for you to articulate the muscles of speech, but you still are fully cognitive. You're certain, you're intelligent, you're aware, so you just can't talk. It's the most profound disability. It's worse than being paraplegic or blind or anything. And what this company called Cognition has done is created an AR headset that allows people like Chris here to be able to speak with his brain. So let's take a look at what it kind of looks like. It's a modern, industrial design for kind of a consumer wearable thing. And on the front of it is a display that is a heads-up display, and in the back is brain interfaces, BCI or EEG electrodes. And the way it works is in the display, the person sees a heads-up display of kind of menu options, kind of like a computer interface, but instead of tapping, because they can't use their hands, they use their mind. And there's a thing called evoke potential technique, where it's actively stimulating the retina around the area of the little targets in the screen. And then if you think about the target, we can detect it in the back of the head in the occipital lobe a few milliseconds later. This technology has been kind of around for a while, but it turned out that it was impractical until deep neural net modeling and some other modern technologies came around. And now it works. So now we can augment people with this ability. And it's called Cognition 1. It's very cool. And this is not, this is also just one of many modalities in which the computer is now extending these fully functional human beings, but overcoming their profound disabilities so they can participate fully, have email conversations, text. This guy actually, the guy Chris, is actually a disc jockey. He runs dances. He does a DJ, which is kind of amazing. All right, so I'm really pleased with how that's working. It's one example of what happens when we add the machine around the human today to give essentially superhuman power to this guy. Another example of this is what happens when we point the camera at the face of the human. We all have this already. 2 billion people a day make faces. I mean, it's selfies. It's crazy, right? So we have high fidelity, high quality imaging of our faces happening all the time. And it turns out that with that modern cell phone, we have enough signal when you combine it with a deep neural network to be able to essentially pull out most of the vital signs. Now, again, this has been in the labs for a while. MIT had a big deal about this for a while, but it was all kind of experimental. It really wasn't practical. A company I'm working with called Hospital on Mobile is actually making it real so that they can really, truly pull out heart rate variability, blood pressure, temperature, all these amazing vital signs. The kind of thing you would get if you went to the hospital and you had a nurse, attach objects to you. But now with just having the camera on your cell phone as the sensor. This is not just for curiosity's sake. It turns out it was driven by the application of migraines. Migraines are extremely debilitating to hundreds of millions of people around the world, and they're basically untreatable unless you know the timing, unless you can predict the timing of the migraine. And so it turns out to predict the timing of a migraine, humans can't do it. but if you give very high quality data, longitudinal daily measures of things like vital signs, you can actually have an AI model that can predict it. So this is an example of not only of perception from the AI, but also awareness or interpretation of the signal to give a kind of a peek into the brain to see things that humans can't see. And a third example, I wanted to make one more point. This is the cutting edge of this area is called pupilometry, and the cutting edge of pupilometry is micropupilometry. It turns out that you can see an enormous amount of information about what's happening in the brain by looking at the human pupil. And then because computers can see things 60 frames a second, you can actually watch how much, not just that it's dilating, but how quickly it's dilating. And there's signal in there that humans can't see. Even the best con artists can't read that. But it's the power that all of our computers, the machines we carry around with us every day, already have enough signal to do this. A third example is like this is a company called Mindstrong. This is very exciting. The idea here is that another task that humans have no ability to do, which is to predict severe mental illness. If you have, and these are really debilitating diseases, PTSD, depression, bipolar disease, schizophrenia. These diseases are just absolutely impossible to predict on a day-to-day basis. And if you're lucky, you stumble your way into a psychiatrist's office at some point, and maybe a neurologist, and they can do a diagnosis that you have this condition overall. But what really matters is that you be able to predict when it happens, just like the migraine, and so that you can get yourself into the hospital, or that someone can help you make sure you keep taking your medicine, as otherwise you end up on the street. So a company like Mindstrong realized that you can't just have everyone in the hospital or in the doctor's office every day. Instead, they found that there's signal in the phone about your brain. And what does that mean? Well, it turns out that as you use your smartphone, the smartphone is actually really hard to use. It really taxes your brain. And so as you tap and swipe and so on, you're giving information about how well your brain is functioning. So if your brain is going off a bit, then you can pick it up in the signal. And they've done this. They built a deep neural network that uses over 3,000 data points a day to monitor for changes in core cognitive function and working memory. And with these basically kind of low-level mental functions, they can now predict severe mental illness and the life-saving kind of consequences. Now they can have essentially a telehealth service for mental health care that uses this new superpower of the AI to see into the brain, but using only the data that's already there, already in everyone's hands. And I want to end with this slide here, which is a bit of an eye chart, but it's worth going into a new model. This is really what I wanted to introduce today, is that when today, and this is not the future, this is today, we live digitally mediated lives. And we're doing it exactly right now. We're looking at each other with cameras and microphones, and we have computers in between, and we have networks of computers in between those. And so we're already fully plugged in to the sort of metaverse, as it were. But the way we interact with it is oftentimes, say, social media or other kinds of things. So we have a brain, we have a mental state. We use our smartphones, which of course takes our brain activity. Then we end up going into the world of digital, which of course then produces data, which is used by the world of digital to manipulate us. And then it turns out that the same data can also be used to be aware of us. And so that can then predict our conditions, our mental conditions. And if you go around the circle, then essentially from a predicted condition, you can predict interventions, like you should go to the hospital now, or you should take your medicine for migraine, right? And then those interventions then change us. And so now we have a new kind of feedback loop where the human and the digital environment and the AI models and the sensors and the actuators are all in a feedback loop. And this is essentially kind of biofeedback of a much more sophisticated kind. And I think that's the thing that I wanted to throw into the conversation, is that we now have a biofeedback loop with humans and machines that will begin a new kind of coevolution. And I'm not talking about singularity. I'm not talking about future stuff. I'm talking about right now, every single day with our phones, we are co-evolving in this digital environment. And then so there's really two directions we can go with this. One is we individually are learning how to manage this new kind of cognitive onslaught, right? So we know that because some of us have figured out how to ignore the toxicity of social media and can continue with our lives to control our attention, to control the feeds of information that come to us. But we need some help. So part of it is individual. And the second part is that as we, in this feedback loop, there's a collective intelligence, so that as some of us learn to thrive and some of us become addicted or manipulated by the individual system, we also collectively have learned, some people have learned to use these tools of digital mediation to collectively augment ourselves, become collectively smarter. Wikipedia, for example, or Move On, or Meetup, or change.org. These are collective collective ways in which we can work together in new ways. And of course, the government is the traditional collective intelligence body. And they're now very interested in how does that technology play in that. But of course, as we all know, that it goes both ways. So if the feedback loop is broken, then the collective intelligence cycle goes downhill. Topic for a different session, but that's really where it really follows from the very theory of biofeedback.